Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Climate Finance and the Carbon Markets. I'm Charles Bedford. We're broadcasting from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Today's guest is a continuation of a conversation we're having with Donna Lee from Calyx Global, former U.S. climate negotiator, where she developed very thick skin and on behalf of the Americans in a series of climate negotiations, but now really focused on the voluntary carbon market and how to provide a set of services to market participants to make sure that the voluntary carbon market has high integrity and is delivering big impact for the world for climate change. So welcome, Donna. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here again.
Tell us a little bit about Calyx Global and sort of what the mission is and where you guys are coming from.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned on the last podcast or last conversation we had that in about a couple of decades of working on climate change, I have not seen the carbon markets take off the way that they have. There are estimates. I think last year it became $1 billion industry, and there are estimates that it's going to be multi-billion dollars very quickly. So as we're watching this finance grow, I'm thinking, how can we ensure that it has impact? Or how can we, think about how to shift this finance to really increase the impact that it can have? And so Calyx Global was developed with the mission of, we say, better carbon markets. And what we want to do is increase the impact, we say, for the planet and for people. And we say the planet and for people because we're doing two things. We feel like providing transparency to market actors on the quality of carbon credits and the impact of carbon credits can help to make this shift, to try to move the market into the place where it has more impact. And so we have ratings, carbon credit ratings on the greenhouse gas integrity, and that's where we hope to impact the planet. We want to let buyers and investors know this claimed emission reduction, 1 ton of CO2 reduced or sequestered, like, is that a good claim? And so we have ratings on greenhouse gas integrity. And we also, we have two sides of Calyx Global. We say we want to have an impact on people, and therefore we also have a ratings on sustainable development impact. One of the reasons why we do this, and I feel really strongly about this, is that with all this new money coming to the market, there is a climate justice issue that we have to pay attention to, that we should care about. Climate equity, I think, is really important. If we were to just look at greenhouse gas integrity, we might drive a lot of money to Switzerland for direct air capture projects, or maybe to the United States where we have technologies and we can really create these, robust credits. But we also feel that climate finance should be driven to the most vulnerable people and communities and countries as part of this market. And so that's why we also provide a sustainable development impact ratings and hope to, increase impact on people.
That's cool. So climate and people is the mission, and I love the way you guys think about it. At the macro level, you also, one of the things I really appreciate about your thinking is you look at everything from sort of from the ground, like actually, delivering climate impact on the ground and people impact on the ground at the project level. But you also look at methodologies, you also look at systems. And so, I think probably the thing that's commercially most interesting to people right now is the project work, but you have a pretty robust view because of both of you and Duncan's background on how this all works. Not just is that project in Paraguay a good project, but does it fit into the Paraguay system? Is it using the right methodologies? Is it using the right certification processes? The whole kind of how does it fit into the global markets? So that holistic view is important, but then the real rigor is happening at that at the project level. Is that a good articulation of how your value proposition?
Yeah, so I mean, we do. We look, there's almost like a supply chain or a chain of events that happens, right? When a carbon credit is formed, we call it the project cycle. And it starts with the standard, the body that issues or generates or creates that actual asset, right? The carbon credit. And then below standards, they have methodologies. That's how do you actually estimate that a ton of CO2 was sequestered or reduced. And those methodologies are very technical. But we think it's important to really look at those calculations, the data, the parameters. How is it that a project claims 100 tons and not 120 tons? And then we go all the way to the project and look at what's happening at the project level. So for us, we feel like it's important to look at all of these levels, and we provide ratings of standards, of methodologies, and then project by project. And maybe just to give your audience a sense, there's probably right now about, maybe around 20 standards, but only 4 standards generate over 90% of the voluntary credits. So it's really concentrated. Mm-hmm. Methodologies, there's, maybe 100 or 100 plus methodologies, but really only 20 or 30 probably generate 90% of the voluntary credits. And then projects, there are nearly 6,000 projects. So it's a lot more effort to look project by project, but it's our ambition to do so.
And the projects themselves have it's a similar reduction in numbers of the number of projects that's delivering 90% of the credits too. That's the way 100 projects are delivering 90% of the credits in the world, right? Is that?
It's something like that. I'm not sure it's that concentrated. I think you can take, for example, forestry projects, and you can take the top 100 forestry projects, and that would be about 20 to 25% of the market. But that's still quite a large concentration if, out of 6,000 projects. But there's definitely a concentration at the project level as well.
So there's a certification standard body, and that is providing some quality control. All of the projects, when they go to get certified, have to go get a third party audit, essentially, which is a verification and validation body that has to come in and say, okay, you're doing what you say you're doing, and you can take this certification back to the standard, and they'll use that to issue the credits. And so there's a couple of checks already in place in terms of quality. What is the why does the market need an extra level of review? What's the value add from a corporate perspective of what you guys bring?
I think that's such a great question, Charles, because ostensibly these standards or certifying bodies are, should be promoting quality, right? That's their mantra. That's what they do. They're a standard. That word means that supposedly they're setting a bar for quality. The problem is in the voluntary carbon markets, there's no one looking over the standards themselves, right? So in a compliance market, there is a regulatory body, a regulator, and the regulator is the one that decides which standards are meeting their requirements. In the voluntary market, standards are just, they're just an organization that's out there, just like us, that has decided this is where we're going to set the standard. And interestingly, standards are commercially conflicted, right? So standards make their money, their revenue, mostly off of issuance fees. So for every carbon credit they issue, they get, 10 cents or 17 cents. So you can imagine if the lower you set the standard, the more flow through you get of credits and the more then revenues you make. And nobody's telling them exactly where to set this. And so for them, in some ways, it's a trade-off between revenues and a reputation.
Yeah.
And so I think what has happened in the marketplace. And I think it's pretty well recognized now by most of the, at least sophisticated companies, that just because you're using one of these popular standards, you're going to get a good credit. I think what's happened increasingly as this market has grown, we've seen market watchdogs and NGOs and the Greenpeace, et cetera, really doing investigative reporting and looking at these credits that are certified by these standards and finding that there are quality issues and that there's actually quite a range of quality even within the same standard.
That's a really great point. And that is absolutely right? The holding up some of this stuff to you have to have a standard. You have to have a registry that, and you have to have some sort of issuance. And essentially the hope with the voluntary market is that the world becomes discriminating about what they're buying and, discriminating about from a project perspective and being thoughtful about which standards and which methodologies. Now, I have some of my favorite project types and then within and methodologies, and then within those, I have my own kind of biases going into it, but based just on experience as much as anything. And my background as a conservationist and my focus on sort of people sensitive conservation projects. That's sort of the way I come at it. But it's definitely not a sort of a scientific or rigorous process that I go through. When I look at a forestry project, for example, I look at a set of things that, indicators like what the benefit sharing is with the local community, and actually what the financial structure of the project is. What, does the community own it, or are they just getting occasional payments from it, and how much payment is, how much funding is going. I look at things like land tenure and whether the tenure of the project is owned by local people, indigenous groups, et cetera, or if it's essentially unregulated or unclear land tenure and who's claiming it. So those are some of the things I look at. How do you guys think about project types and methodologies? Do you have any favorites? If you were betting on a horse race and you had like a Indian solar project in lane 1 and a Paraguayan avoided deforestation project in lane 2, what would be your favorite in terms of sort of the impact that they're able to deliver both to your mission, to the Calyx, carbon integrity and people benefits?
Yeah, you're asking a really tricky question, Charles.
Pick your favorite. Choose your favorite. Which is your favorite?
We try very hard, not to pick winners. What we have done is we've created a structured framework in which to do these assessments. And we look at a range of quality parameters. And all the things that you've talked about are things that we look at, not just for sustainable development impact, but things like permanence, right? That's an important quality characteristic of a credit, that if you plant some trees, that they're not going to be gone 10 years from now. And so, our community's benefiting, who's watching over those forests, is land tenure clear, speaks to the durability of that project. And so we do look at those issues. So we have a very structured framework, and for every project, we might ask over 100 questions to really try to provide information and assessments to make this exact comparison that you're talking about, so that when our buyers can say, okay, Calyx has given this rating and it's comparable. You can compare a landfill gas project to a ozone depleting substances, to a renewable energy, to a reforestation, because we have this, it's a scientific, structure of how we're doing these assessments, so they're comparable and comprehensive.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to pick my favorite project. I will say the other thing is that It's often a trade-off. It's often a trade-off because let's take nature-based projects. An ecosystem, it's much harder to measure the carbon and carbon stock changes across a landscape than it is at a wind farm, or right. Maybe something where you're reading a dial rather than trying to measure like how is this carbon changing across a really diverse and diffuse versus what we would call a point source emission. But nature-based projects have really strong sustainable development impacts. And so in some ways, the choice is up to the buyer.
Right.
And the kind of characteristics and attributes that they're interested in.
But you give them essentially the tools, essentially the data set and an independent judgment about projects. You give buyers, essentially your clients, that independent ability to sort of say, okay, let's compare, project A versus project B. Does a ton here equal a ton there? And do the benefits to local people and sustainable development, are they roughly equal? And that's a big service to provide that kind of comparative value proposition across a global market. And as you said, 100 methodologies and 6,000 projects and 20 different standard bodies. It's because it's a pretty bewildering array if you're the corporate buyer looking to make sure that you buy the best stuff for you, to offset your carbon. It's a pretty bewildering array of things to try to unscramble. So you provide essentially that translation across all of those different standards, methodologies, and projects, and a way to kind of look at them together.
We hope so. I mean, that's our aim. We want to really enable buyers to make choices. Our perfect client is a buyer who cares about quality and impact.
Yeah.
A buyer who's just bottom fishing for the cheapest credit is not our client base. Our client base are companies that really want to buy and determine quality. I think in some ways we like to think of ourselves like the S&P or Moody's. Financial instruments have ratings like AAA to C minus, double B, A minus. So we want to be that type of organization that provides that kind of information, because it can be really hard, unless you're very technical, have a lot of expertise in a particular project type, it might be hard to really understand. Right.
Well, cool. That's a great explanation of Calyx and how you guys think about the world. I know that people may have some questions and want to follow up. I'll include your website and LinkedIn profiles in the show notes, and make sure that people to know how to connect with you. It's great to talk to you about this stuff. Calyx it seems like it's well on its way, even just a year into it.
Yeah, and maybe if I can make a pitch at the end of this podcast.
Please do.
There are 6,000 projects. That's a lot of work. So if you have any students that are interested in learning about the carbon markets, working with experts, and want to collaborate and contribute to Calyx, we are happy. We brought on board about a dozen graduate students in the last month to help us out. So that's my pitch. Come join us.
Excellent. You are talking to the right audience. We have 50 master's and PhD students who are part of this class, all of whom are thinking about both what to do for their degree fulfillment, but also what to do with their lives. They're all very committed and excited about the carbon markets. Many of them are from China, but also around the world. So I'm sure you'll get a few follow-ups from these folks. Thank you for that offer.
If you believe in our mission, I would say contact me.
Perfect. All right, Donna, thank you so much for your time, and appreciate so much what you guys are doing. It's great stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Charles.